Okay, thank you everyone. Is the mic's on? Yep. Yeah. So thank you everyone. So for the last session of our book festival weekend, we're going to look at and consider the question of the future of the photo book. And in order to shine some light on this fascinating subject, we have a very good panel. We're also going to be joined by Stephen Gil, who of course we know is one of the exemplary examples of a modern artist, photographer, self-publisher. But he's so busy signing books that he's not coming down. He's going to join us in about 10 minutes. So first I want to introduce my panel, or the panel this afternoon. So on the far right, no, your left, is Michael Mack. And Michael used to work with Stidle for many years and then went out and started his own company. He did, in fact, do an imprint under the Stidle umbrella called Stidle Mack. And then in about 3 or 4 years ago, was it now, Michael? Started Mack Books, which has been one of the key new players in terms of British publishing. They've done a very good list. They've been very successful, so a very good person to have. And next to him is Dewi Lewis, who's one of the great British photographic publishers. He started out at Corner House up in Manchester, where he started to do, when he was director of the Corner House Art Centre, he started to publish books and also distribute books. And when he left Corner House, he set up Dewi Lewis, and for over 25 years now, is it, Dewi? You've been independent? And
20 years independent.
Right, how many books have you published, do you think?
Absolutely no idea.
Right, there you go. So there's a definite answer from Dewi. But the point is that he's one of the key publishers and promoters of British photography in the UK. And to my right, your left, is Thijs, who's half of Wassink the Dutch duo who started with a storm, as explained by Corine Noordenbos yesterday, in the Arles Festival in 2004, 5 was it?
7.
7, sorry, I'm a bit early then, with his...
You're a bit behind.
I'm behind, in fact, not early, with their wonderful book, Empty Bottles. And since then, Thijs has been involved in publishing. He's gone down many routes. They've done them themselves. They've used other publishers. So it's going to be very interesting to hear his perspective from photographers. So first, I'm going to ask our panel just to give their thoughts about what's happening to photographic book publishing and indeed what might be happening in years to come. So Michael, kick us off.
Sure. So I think in the future we will see an even more extreme...
I think you need to be a bit nearer the mic.
Can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah. An even more extreme division and shift between analog and digital. I find it quite interesting that actually the impact of digital is not particularly in the arena or in the space in the way in which it was anticipated. The fact is that digital media have changed the nature of book publishing, but in the illustrated and photo book arena, it's not in the case of a huge, vast number of digital books being produced and sold. Is actually in the means of generating distribution systems, generating small communities through social media, and facilitates the very vibrant situation we currently have. And I think that kind of space between mainstream publishing, which is very engaged with digital, and the arts community, which is far less so and has been pushed away from that or stepping away from that, and has almost validated our paper publishing possibilities, I think that will become even more, they'll be even more estranged. And of course that's been wonderful for people like me who work in the paper world, because the reality is that people appreciate what we do when there's a well-conceived idea that is seen through into a paper form of a physical book. And I don't see any time soon the idea of the digital illustrated book overwhelming the physical book in the way in which it has with primarily text-based or teaching-based, scientific, medical, etc., which for a long time have anyway been digital. So,
I mean, Michael, we know that you're one of the pioneers in terms of publishing apps to complement your actual hard copies of the books. How many books do you, or how many apps do you actually make from your list? Do you do them automatically, or do you just select them very carefully?
We tend to be quite selective about them, having learned, the hard way over the past 3 years, the difficulties and the potential pitfalls. And I think the reality is that the audience for the physical book is quite distinct from the audience for the textbook, and it depends for the digital books. And it depends very, very much, as it always should actually, what the content is. So there shouldn't be an automatic notion of simply translating to digital for the sake of it, because in economic terms, that doesn't work. Whereas if you take a book, for example, a book that I published a couple of years ago, Luigi Ghiri's Kodachrome, that's done very, very well in both physical paper form and in digital form, because it's a significant piece of photographic history. It wasn't widely available, and you start seeing then that the distribution channels that digital opens up of direct download allow you to reach into audiences that you can't with the physical books, because of the difficulties and the limitations, and also a very problematic area, which is cost, the price point.
When you do an app, do you just show the PDF of the book, or do you have add-on things as well?
Not at all. And app is the wrong language. Sorry to be clear, but the reality is that a bit like CD-ROM publishing in the late 80s, apps for our type of publishing, I believe, are literally a dead end. They're a cul-de-sac into which quite a few of us have, spent some money and realized pretty quickly that the problem with apps is that you have to develop them for specific hardwares and software capacity. So you either choose which horse you're going to gamble on, or which horses you're going to gamble on. You're going to go with Apple, you're going to go with Google, and as a consequence of that, or Windows, and as a consequence of that, you're then corralled by what's referred to as their walled garden and their means of dissemination. They also edit and censor content. We were unable to get certain of our apps approved by Apple because of the fact one of them is a quite famous piece that won the Deutsche Börse Prize last year, Brumberg and Schnaren's War Primer, and Apple refused to publish it on the basis of the images involved, all of which were freely available on the internet, but because it was attempting to be made into an app, they censored it, effectively. So those sorts of issues made it clear to us that we needed to step aside from those sort of corporations and be making not apps that were controlled by other platforms in order to reach directly to the audience that we know, and therefore they're not apps, they're actually boringly but HTML-based EPUB 3 books, which are much simpler to produce and can be seen on any screen, whether it's your large Google TV or your desktop.
Dewi?
Right. Well, Michael's talked really in terms of the digital developments, which I wouldn't argue with at all. I think what I'd like to focus on is, as Martin said, I've been publishing a long time. The first book I did was in 1987, so that's, I don't like to count the years, but it's a lot of time. And the thing that I've found over that whole period is that there is constant change. And therefore, where is Photobook publishing going now? All I know is that there are going to be continual changes, and as publishers, we have to be ready to move, adapt, etc. And those changes are partly in terms of production and how books are presented, whether it's in terms of analog or digital, but more importantly, for commercial organizations like the two of us, we have to be looking at the method of the means of distribution, how the bookshops work, how we're getting books out to people, whether we're getting enough return from a book to be able to keep publishing. And that's where already there have been massive shifts over the last few years. When I started, the large book chains, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble, etc. Firstly, there was a different scenario in that bookshops bought books. Now they take them all on sale or return. So when I started, we could place, I remember placing Peter Fraser's Two Blue Buckets and getting in two large shops in Manchester, 50 copies in each shop, which would be absolutely impossible now. It would be almost impossible to get them to even take one copy. So there's a big
Nothing
shift.
against Peter Fraser, by the way.
Nothing against Peter. I mean, do have a look at the average Waterstones, even the quite large Waterstones, and you'll see the range that they carry now is generally pretty limited. And so the shift has been over to obviously online sales and specialist bookshops. I mean, the saviour for us has been in part Amazon and the online retailers, but also the spread of the small bookshop, the specialist bookseller who's operating on a worldwide basis, whether it's Dashwood Books in New York or so many small people that we're supplying. So how that's going to shift, I'm not absolutely sure. But I think one of the key problems about it is that although many of us believe we're in a golden age of the photo book, actually the quantity of books being produced is enormous, but the opportunity to see those books is increasingly limited. So, for example, if Martin publishes, with Martin's next book, many people who follow Martin's work will simply buy it on Amazon without seeing what the book is. They'll read about the subject matter, they perhaps see a review or two. But if it's a first time, if it's a photographer who's publishing their first book and they don't have that track record in a sense, then what is it that makes someone decide to buy it? It is seeing it. And at the moment, those bookstores are not taking the books. So where are those new titles going to be seen? And so for me, that's one of the big worries.
But it's not all doom and gloom insofar that, if you look back even this year, you have your John Tonks Empire book, which you published, which sold out in 3 months.
I think it's all very encouraging that there are some things that you can really take forward. But I think the reality is, there are a number of realities. There's the production side, there's the commercial side. And I think we all probably feel that digital at the moment really is not providing a route forward for production. But I have no doubts it will. And then you have the concern about what happens to print production. At the moment, printers close regularly. They go bankrupt regularly. As if we compare the print runs over the last 10 years, an average photo book would have been 2,000 copies to 3,000 copies. Now 1,000 is not unusual, and even lower quantities. And so there's a change there. And the printers need, printing presses are big, hungry beasts. And the less work, the shorter print runs mean that prices go up. And I can see, it's not going to happen yet, but I can see that offset printing, as we know it now in terms of photography, is going to become almost a craft area. And that is going to be perhaps the biggest shift. I think I got involved in Photobooks because I believed I wanted to publish because I had a democratic view about things. If I saw work that I believed in, I wanted it to be out there for lots of people to see. There's been a shift in that over the years. There are smaller numbers, many books being bought by collectors and not actually getting out into broad circulation. I think that position will get worse. On the other hand, there are more people producing really exciting books. So it's a conflict.
Thank you. So Thijs, you're half of Wassink Lundgren. You've done many books in your careers. Tell us a bit about how you've done those books and how you see your book publishing, which I'm sure, or how you're going to publish your books in the future. Do you imagine being with more publishers or doing them yourselves? Talk us through your thinking.
We indeed published a few books, and some of them were totally self-published, and some were either totally with a publisher or a mixture of the two. And we always try to look for what we want from a book, For instance, with Tokyo Tokyo, the book that we did in 2010, I believe, it was partly self-published, and partly with a publisher in Switzerland and in Japan for distribution, because we realized that was a very tricky thing to do, to get a book all over the world in all the shops. So yeah, we always kind of see, when we have the content for a book, we think about what we want to do with that book, and then we'll figure out if we approach someone or if we do it ourselves.
Each project has its own formula, if you like.
Yes, and they don't all end up in books, because it's not. I think the way you think about photography books, this is your core business in a way. To me, it's not. I also don't have a business plan, which I think you should probably, or you would probably have as a publisher. Or maybe that's the problem with the future of Photobooks. But I just make stuff, and then I find the kind of right format for it.
Okay, I've seen Stephen. Is he there? He's literally there a minute ago. Oh, there he is. I can see him in the back. Stephen, come and join us, please. So we've just heard from Stephen, of course, who's had a very illustrious career as a photographer and a publisher. Can you just explain how Nobody Books, which is the name of your company, how you've managed to sustain and how you've actually managed to raise the money and to publish your books?
Yeah, sure. I think the first book I published, I mentioned, was a title called Invisible. And in the mid and late 90s, I was doing a lot of editorial work, mostly portraits, mostly for weekend supplements, at a time when magazines were commissioning. And that was my bread and butter work as a self-employed photographer for many years, maybe 10 years or so. And the money I earned from that, I would then plough into my personal work, and my first book was financed entirely from money earned from those commissions. I was deliberately sort of steering away from sort of corporate or advertising work, just to kind of try to protect the work, really. Later, as my work started to surface in book, as the book, but also in small exhibitions, and as people started to buy prints, often that also then became a way of financing my own books. Then there was a collector, in particular with the Hackney Wick series, the Archive of Modern Conflict, who entirely financed the production of the Hackney Wick book, which I was delighted, by the way, because this was a book a body of work I really wanted to surface. And in that period, I was knocking on lots of people's doors, as you do, and I think trying to present work and trying to get it published. But then, yeah, a collector purchased the work in exchange for paying for the entire production of a book. So I was really happy to get this thing off the ground. Of course, the collector was happy also to get a box of hand C-type prints of every single picture in the book, but it was just a way of enabling this thing to
And this relationship
surface.
you've had with the archive has been ongoing?
Yeah, and it varies. I mean, I don't present all things to the archive, and they don't publish all things, and some books I finance myself, other books I haven't the money to have it printed, so I would maybe make a newspaper, or I showed a couple of examples where I would use existing books and kind of scoop out the content. In 2008, I made a book in Trinidad, which was actually just using the shells of old books and kind of piggybacking them and using letterpress and sewing machines and C-type prints. And so it just depends, again, on the subject and whether, of course, the series I feel deserves to exist as a book as well. I don't publish books of all my work, all my
So,
series.
I mean, you've been very lucky because some of your books you have a patron for. What I do want to ask Dewi and Michael is, we all know, it's no secret, I'm going to reveal it here now just in case anyone didn't know, that if you're an unknown photographer, and I'm sure there are many people who sat in this room who would love to have their first book published, and someone comes to you and you really like the work, the bottom line is that they have to put some money into that project. Can you talk us through how you decide how much that should be, and do you only now accept new photographers if they actually put money up front to help the publication of that book? Michael, first.
I never take money from photographers. Ever. Never have, never will. So.
Well, there you go. Dewi.
Okay.
Whoopsie, I don't...
Sadly...
This is, by the way, Dewi, this is not a court.
No, so sadly I can't say that. When I started, we would finance around about 90-95% of the year's budget on books, and that was the other amount would come from Arts Council grants. It's almost impossible to get Arts Council grants now. I think we've probably had one in the last 10 years. And the reality for us is that I would say probably 40% of our total expenditure is now covered by sponsorship or funding from photographers. But I can't think of an example where the total cost has been covered by the photographer. And I'll explain that even when the production costs might be covered, the cost for us to launch and to do a book, in terms of things like getting press copies out, attending on press, everything related to that, equates to probably £3,000 or £4,000. So even if someone comes with the full production costs, we're actually saying, okay, we're going to put in more money ourselves. So it's based on always a choice of the project, not the finance. I can say that we go to PhotoFest in Houston every 2 years, and I can say on average I turn down 5 or 6 books which come with a lot of money, a lot more money than is needed for the production, but we turn it down. And I'd also say, at the moment, the last 6 weeks I'll have done 4 or 5 books. 3 of those have no finance coming in from outside. So it's a real mixed economy. And for me, the position always is a decision on whether I think I can actually make a return on that book. Can I get the production costs back? Now, there are projects I would love to do, but I know in reality it's going to be a 500 copy print run, and we can't finance that from the sales of the book. So in that situation, or even a 1,000 copy print run, in that situation we have to get funding in. So it is a balance. There's no straightforward rule. But I would warn, I think we're pretty straightforward and quite honest. I hope we are. But I would warn every photographer that there are an increasing number of sharks out there who will publish your book, but they will want double the production costs, so they have no reason why they need to sell a copy. And that is a worry, and you'll see it increasingly.
Sorry?
Can we name the shark?
No, whoa. It's up to the people who've identified them as being sharks. No, I don't think it's fair, really, do you?
No, I can't.
Ask him later, Joachim. Michael, I mean, it's very bold of you to decide to publish many unknown photographers just from pure conviction. I know you do many known photographers as well. Have you found that they've been sustainable? Have you actually made the right decisions about selecting the people? And
Not
it's
always.
the firm belief in their project and their work that's led you to do that?
Absolutely, and I've made mistakes and lost money, and and other projects that have worked well have sustained those. But it would actually be very easy for me to just publish well-known, established artists and photographers, and normally those are the ones that come with some sort of, come with money, are accompanied by potential support. That would be very uninteresting very, very quickly. I'm not trying to kind of paint myself as some sort of hero here at all. The reality is that it does work very well when you have an established artist, you have a project with them, they're supported by numerous galleries, you make an arrangement with their galleries that they're going to buy 300 copies of the book, and you structure the project in that way, and very often you can get pretty close to, covering 3/4 of your, but it's not a condition of the project.
When I talk about money coming in from other sources, I actually mean advanced sales as well. So it's not necessarily that the photographer is putting in their personal money, but they may be arranging for their gallery to buy 400 or 500 copies.
Yeah.
But for me, that's not me risking my money. So there's a similarity, but also major differences.
But I think what Martin's talking about, and I know that you're not in this boat, and there are a number of them out there, publishers who, if you go with a check, they will publish your work, and they're making a lot of books. You can see that that's how they're doing it. Does that answer the question? What else was there?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. That gives us a much better insight. One other issue I just want to quickly talk about before perhaps we open it up is this whole thing with Amazon. Because, for example, I know that you, Michael, declined to sell on Amazon. Just talk us through that, because here we have the biggest online salespeople in the whole world. Why do you actually shut the door on potentially your biggest client?
It's actually a fundamental issue in the future of the book. It really is, because the difficulty with Amazon is they have absolutely no interest in books. What they're interested in is market share. So the way in which they leverage that share, and it's a bit like the model of property developers, actually, which is apparently when they're developing some big shopping centre, they love to sell that corner outlet, that corner store, first and foremost, as early as they can, get something like a bookstore in there, because they'll give it to them a little bit cheaper, because they've got that intellectual cachet, and they've got lots and lots of footfall of people coming through, browsing, wanting to have a look, and they feel that that'll drive a lot of custom. So Bezos, I think, used that, combined with the fact that the information in relation to books is all done through an ISBN. There's a great system across through all, which is digitized, has been for a long time in relation to books. The information feeds are very well established. So he used books as a starting point. But the reality is that if you treat with Amazon, they will discount your books. If you say, my standard terms to everybody is 40% non-returnable, we don't vary that. And if I gave those terms to Amazon, they would say, yeah, sure. And then they would do what they do with every other photo book, which is discount them 30% and make a loss. Because I'm nobody, the loss that they would make would mean nothing. But what they would get is my following would then go to them, and they would garner the information in relation to the buying preferences of those people. And that's, of course, the gold in the Amazon model. Their understanding of what people are interested in, and their capacity to push notifications to their people and, make them buy other books of that nature. So, but to be clear, what we do, we are discoverable. Our books are discoverable on Amazon, but we refuse to sell to any wholesaler or Amazon Direct. But we put all our books up on Amazon Marketplace as the publisher, but at the retail price that I set. So that, and as a consequence, we're very popular with many other retailers, whether online or bricks and mortar, because of the fact that we maintain a retail price. We're able to hold to that price, and when people go into their store and look up one of our books, they'll see that that's the price, and maybe they should just buy it.
And Stephen, with Nobody Books, are we able to buy Nobody Books on Amazon? And just talk us through how you sell your books. Do you supply them to the trade, or you just sell them direct?
Initially, I started a tiny online shop, which still exists. And most of the sales, I would say, go via that store, or certainly did at the beginning. But more recently, I think we're getting a lot of orders directly from bookshops. You referred to Dashwood and the little more boutique or specialist photography and art bookshops. So, because at first it was great, it was so exciting. It's like, this is amazing, we're packing all these books, sending them off every Friday. But then then I started to get worried, because as much as I love making books, at heart I make work, and I just didn't want the publishing of books to suffocate my photographic practice. So I've tried to kind of keep a healthy distance, but I work with friends, and each week we dispatch books, and it's on a very small scale. They do surface on Amazon, but not via myself.
But obviously for you, it's much better to sell them direct to the clients. You get a much bigger income.
Yeah.
You get the full retail price, and people can have them signed.
Yes.
So is the idea, and I'm sure both Dewi and Michael also do sign books at full retail price, which is absolutely essential to the business, isn't it? I mean, that's why an event like this can function so well, because people can get their books signed. Thijs, I mean, you produce books in many different ways. Do you have a site where you sell books? Is that the main way you get your books out?
Yeah, we do have a little shop on our website, but it's not the main thing. What we kind of wanted to do with a shop was that if we if people like our work, that it's an easy, accessible way, easy way for people to find our books. So that's kind of the main thing. But we with some of the first books that we did the distribution ourselves, and that was really a hassle and something that we didn't enjoy doing. So therefore, we always sought kind of partnerships with publishers or like small publishers who would then do distribution. So we don't deal with any shops, and we don't go to any fairs, or every now and then maybe. Our online shop is mainly that people can see the stuff we made, and they can buy it there if they don't find it anywhere else.
So you're a very hybrid pair of artists insofar you have all these different strategies.
Yeah.
You cover everything basically.
We cover everything, but there's no, it's not as kind of specialist as like Stephen's shop in a way, or kind of hardcore into publishing. Yeah.
Okay. Do we need to open it up now? Is that, do you think? Yes. So we have this illustrious panel with us. I'm going to invite any questions from the floor. This is your chance to hear it straight from the publishers and the artists. Do we have any questions?
I just thought of something, actually.
Oh yeah, go on.
No, I just thought of something because we were talking about sort of pre-sales, and that's something that helps initially finance the production of books. And recently I've met lots of people, and lots of people making books for the first time, who are working with these Kickstarter type projects, which seems to work really well. And I mean, particularly if you're making your own books, and so you're financing the production of your book based on pre-sales of something that doesn't yet exist, and I'm sure, and it seems to work well. And I have friends who've done that, and it's a way of, without having to go and knock on sort of publishers' doors, or if you want to sort of assemble and make your own book, it's a great way of kind of financing something, but from finishing the work, having a dummy, or presenting it in a way. And I've seen 3 or 4 great examples of that, and I just mentioned that.
I can maybe add to that in because that is indeed a great way, and Rob Hornstra is very famous for doing something like that. What we also do sometimes is that we go to a few collectors, the people who bought our work, prints of our work before, and just see if they are interested in the project. So there are a few people who kind of follow our work, and they then become kind of patrons for our project. And then you need to see less people, because if someone buys a book for 30 quid or 40 quid, then you need to see a lot of people before you have financed your book. So that's another way that kind of we sometimes deal with it.
The Kickstarter thing is really relevant. I think it's extraordinary. I think that a not-for-profit like Aperture, they've started financing some of their books through Kickstarter campaigns, which I was incredulous about to begin with. But I'm assured by Chris that it makes a lot of sense, and they always garner more money than they need in order to produce the books. But I think, and this is very relevant, I think as an author, as an artist, to use a Kickstarter campaign also has the advantage that it immediately gives you a distribution network, because publishing is about audiences. So I think just the main flaw in the self-publishing model, in my opinion, is that whilst it's wonderful to claim that you're self-published 10 books, if you haven't found an audience for those books and distributed them to people who actually read them and understand what your work is about, it's not really published, And so I think that's the missing bit in most of the self-publishing model, and clearly Kickstarter gets around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on Kickstarter, we've been working with a photographer, Simon Branthorpe, and he's raised funds for a book that we'll be doing in the autumn with him. There has been one very bad example, Emphasis, which was a sort of crowdsourcing platform, and several photographers raised their full amount of money through that, and then the company went bust. So so there have been, with all these things, I think when you're dealing with, as a photographer, if you're dealing with publishers, don't be too trusting. If you're dealing with any platform, don't be too trusting. I mean, photographers are always so keen to get their book out there that sometimes common sense really races out of the door. So I would just say be very careful on all these things.
And as well as Kickstarter, of course, we have people like Andy Sewell, who yesterday spoke about, and indeed Rob Hornstra in the early days, where he actually gathered friends and supporters by making a special edition of the book, say charging €100 and selling 100, he got the basic 10,000 euros that he needed to help publish the book. And as well as the special edition, he had the longer edition as well. So sometimes if you've got a very good social network, personally, like a Facebook page and Twitter and a following, perhaps doing it yourself is good, because Kickstarter inevitably, we talk about Kickstarter and it's a great thing, but what we don't see and understand is the number of Kickstarter projects that actually fail because they didn't have the buzz. You've got to create a buzz, if you like, to make it work.
The other thing to say about any self-publishing project, actually, on my far left is one of the self-publishing gurus from the 80s, as was Paul Graham. And both Martin and Paul know that it's not enough just to get the book. The work starts there. And that is the big problem about self-publishing, that there are a lot of photographers who can put together the book and get a wonderful production, but they haven't thought then about the distribution chain, and they don't realise it's going to take them a good solid year of work to get the book out there and get it known.
And then to sell it, because we always assume that we have an empty bottles, we have Stephen's books, which are all very successful, they all sell out. Most books just don't sell, fundamentally, do they? I mean, sadly, even upstairs with the great books we have up there, there's going to be 5% that really sell through and sell out. So there's always going to be those books that get left. And one reason is because you've got to create the excitement behind the book. You've got to have that following, you've got to make the book different. And of course, as we were talking about on Friday with Jerry, when we talk about that, we need bad books in order to understand the good books.
Yeah, there are plenty of those. I think that what you touched on, the idea of producing a maquette or making a print-based version, as you know, Alex Soss did that with Sleeping by the Mississippi, and it was very intelligent, not simply by as a means, it's not just a means of raising funds necessarily to take you to the next stage. Christian Patterson did it with Red-Headed Peckerwood. And the possibilities of that are also that you can reach people, you can reach curators, you can reach out to people with this, special version of the book. And it's a really smart way, I think, I'm saying almost in preference to doing a blurb-type self-publish book where you make something quite special and it really shows that you have an understanding of the process and the book form and its relationship to your idea and your work. And when I see some of those come through onto my desk, some of them are quite extraordinary, and it is the big difference. It makes the big difference that people have that capacity and understanding.
Stephen, I was wondering, when do you show a project to the archive? And do you show it in book form then already, or do you show the loose works?
The arrangement I have with the archive, which is an organisation that's financed some of my books, as we talked about, is that the deal is they never see the work, the dummy. They see a box of prints or early stages of a series, but I've never presented a dummy, a maquette, a sequence, or they have no idea format, size, paper, material. So it's kind of that. I mean, it's a very privileged position to be in, but it's very important for me that I they see the finished book, but have no idea what the book will consist of. Yeah. So and I think that, because that's one of the reasons I started making my own books, was, to see things through without too many external, because we all know we can have it so much input, and I know that's a fine line, and often you can suffocate or derail a project, even with people's opinions who you admire. I think it's just trusting the instincts you had to make the work, and using those same instincts to make the book. I mean, it sounds a little kind of, but it's just, that's the way I do it. But yeah, so no, the book surface. And with regards to promotion, I know Martin was talking about buzz, but in a way like this idea of putting all your energy into firstly making the work, and then treating the bookmaking process as a separate process altogether. But also, I often think, do you really need to do... I think photographers these days are expected to kind of promote and make that buzz. But I think, in a way, it's just nice to announce a book, but not really... And just, hopefully, the book itself will create its own buzz without... I think it's too much, I think, to ask or to expect...
Well, have some good work, then it has a buzz. That's
that's
deal.
what I mean, but put the energy into the work, not the buzz.
So I'm going to open it up now. I see a very keen hand from Donovan at the back. Do you need the mic? Can you take the mic? Have we got the mic? Great.
Well, this is really following on the idea of buzz, yeah. I know traditionally the idea of serialization was very key to publishing. So if you got a new body of work and you serialize it through The Guardian or the New York Times or whoever, it creates a buzz. Given the changes going on within the newspaper industry, I'm just curious, particularly for Michael and Dewi, is serialization still a good vehicle to promote within the established magazines?
Yes, fundamentally it is. I think, having coverage in a mainstream news journal has some positive effects. The difference is they no longer pay for it. And the other factor is that if you get it to the right blogger who positively review it, you will actually sell copies, unlike having it in The Guardian. The comparative is actually extraordinary. You track the figures on our Google Analytics and you see that actually, because we're dealing in these communities of people who understand, who follow the artists, who are interested in the work, and you look at those crossovers and where they mesh, it's great to have something in The Guardian or the FT magazine or something like that, but the implications of that are not, in terms of business or in terms of outreach, as great as more direct.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess the question I have is, given the choice, would you go with a serialization in the FT, let's say, or a blog by Sean O'Hagan, The Guardian, for example?
Well,
you don't have to choose.
You'd go for both. I mean, I'd echo everything that Michael said. We used to seek serialization as a way also of trying to help fund the photographer. That often it was one of the few ways the photographer could be getting income from the project. And it's remarkable to think that in the early 90s I could get £3,000 for 4 pages by an unknown photographer. I mean, that would be extraordinary. But I do think one of the things that we find is that both the magazines and the photographer both seem to think that something in the Sunday Times, Guardian or whatever, they think that it's going to result in massive sales. It doesn't. It can be 20 copies, it can be 30. Get something good through a respected blogger, and the impact can be very immediate. You see it directly in sales,
so photographers should be, when they're doing their own books in conjunction, but they should be sending it to these bloggers. They should be sending it to Alex Soth. They should be sending it to these people that write about books. And if they pick up on it and like it, you're much more likely to do stuff.
We as publishers send to lots of bloggers. Not everyone, but and it does have a real impact.
It does. I would just make the point that the coverage of books and that relationship to the press has an impact not just in direct sales to consumers. For us, the other important factor is that bookstores, if they see coverage in mainstream magazines, they are more likely to respond, interestingly. So so they will then see the possibility that they might racket. What we tend to do is say, in 3 weeks' time, we've got coverage of Bertine van Marlen's book in the FT magazine. We tell them in advance, and then we get a spin-off of orders from bookstores. Yeah. So it's actually a slightly different modelling.
Yeah. I'll just take one more question. Oh. Yeah, okay, someone at the back there. So I think one more question and we should need to wrap up.
Yeah, the sort of elephant in the room question, I hope. I was talking to Jerry yesterday, and he seemed to be of the view that, although it might not have been quite identified yet, some form of electronic or digital delivery would actually push out the physical book. Is that the panel's view or not?
No.
I mean, remember, we're in a room full of people who love the physical book, so although we understand the app...
Yeah, but you're talking about the difficulties, severe difficulties of people producing and selling physical books. Yeah?
Yes.
So is the world we're in just accepting the fact that it's extremely difficult to produce and sell a physical book, or is it the truth
that actually it's going to be
replaced?
I think, for me, the key thing is that there isn't really a digital delivery mechanism yet that will present the book in a form that's really rewarding to us. That will come, but it's not there yet.
And I also think that although it can be difficult to kind of sell a lot of books or reach a really large audience with a book, there are always people who kind of want to make it, and that urge is always stronger than a commercial urge. Because if you see any artist, then if they start, most of them are not in it for the money, because there is not a lot of money in it. So I think that's kind of the driving force.
There's also something that I always say when I'm doing a workshop, and it's basically that with the printed book, certainly in the UK, we as publishers have to deliver a copy to the British Library. And what it means is that if you have kids and they have kids, etc., that your great-great-great-great-grandchildren could, in theory, go to the British Library in how many hundreds of years and ask to see a copy of that physical book. And that longevity, the longevity of the physical book for me is the magic.
And I think on that note, Dewi, we're going to wrap up this panel. So thank you, Stephen, Michael, Dewi and Thijs. We're going to have the last round of announcements from the wonderful Jessa.
I've got some news. Okay. I think, first of all, we really should give a round of applause for that wonderful talk. Thank you.